Hello everyone, Eli here. I have a kind of a different video for you today. It's not going to be the typical collection update or collection video. I've realized that I've been kind of way too lazy lately and haven't done anything out of the ordinary, and that kind of bums me out. So I'm going to do something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I did this with death metal, I did it with black metal. I didn't think my black metal video was as good, but this is going to be a thrash metal video. It was supposed to be the top 20 albums that got me into thrash metal. However, I fucked up and I ended up with 18. So it's going to be the top 18 albums that got me into thrash metal. So keep in mind, this isn't my definitive list. These are just the albums that got me into the genre. Most of these I still love to this day, but most of them also aren't my favorite from that band. They're just... Anyways, so just wanted that to be said before you, kind of rag on some of my choices. So, yeah, I got into thrash metal when I was probably... I think I probably started getting into it around 18 years old, so that would have been 2000. I was, at the time I was listening to a lot of, so I would have been 18, listening to a lot of Ozzy, a lot of Black Sabbath, a lot of AC/DC, and I had started to kind of cross over into, the more traditional metal stuff of like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, King Diamond, stuff like that. And then I discovered thrash, and yeah, I've never looked back since. Still a big fan of thrash. It's not, I don't listen to that much thrash anymore on a daily basis or super frequent, but I still have a deep love for it. So what I did here is I tried to the best of my recollection to categorize them like chronologically, like as I discovered them. It was hard because a lot of these I literally got into like probably the same month. So I mean, I can't remember that far back in such detail. So I did the best I could. So yeah, we'll start with the first one. This is the first thrash, album I can recall hearing, owning, hearing it in its entirety. And I don't want to hear any bitching like, that's not a thrash album, say it's a thrash album, say it's not, it doesn't really matter. It's Megadeth with Countdown to Extinction. This was basically Megadeth's Black Album. This came out in '92, so not too far after the Black Album by Metallica. However, if you're going to compare those two, which I always did, I would say this one is far superior to the Black Album. The Black Album these days, no offense if you like it, but I can't even listen to it. I haven't listened to it in probably almost 20 years, and I don't plan on it. This album I still will play occasionally, and I still like it. There's a couple duds on here, but there are some phenomenal riffs, solos, some really cool songwriting, a lot of stuff that I don't think the Black Album has personally. Still love this album. Yeah, still listen to it on occasion. It's not my favorite... Rust in Peace is my favorite Megadeth album, but I still love this album for what it is. After that, apparently, from what I can remember, I don't know what happened to the case. I just have the CD. I guess I lost the case years ago, and now that I know it's gone, I need to replace it. We got Anthrax, State of Euphoria. I got pretty huge in Anthrax pretty quick, I'll be honest. I heard this album, and it just blew me away. The speed on some of the faster parts on this crushed me. Charlie Benante's powerful drumming, fast drumming, really left a mark on me. In fact, I remember reading an interview with Dave Lombardo one time, and he was talking about how the first time Slayer played with Anthrax, he was actually really nervous because he was worried that Charlie Benante was going to blow him away performance-wise. So that's kind of cool. To this day, not my favorite Anthrax album, but I still think it has held the test of time. From what I've read over the years, most of the Anthrax, big fans, kind of hold this album kind of somewhere in the middle. Not their best, not their worst, somewhere in the middle. And I probably can't argue that, but I think it's a pretty good album. Like I said, I think it stands the test of time. I still like it. I haven't listened to it in a long time, though. I'll have to throw it on soon. After that, I became a huge Metallica fan. I apologize for whatever spilled on this. It didn't get wiped off. It could be blood. It could be chocolate. I don't know. I'm not a big chocolate fan, so I doubt it's that. Anyways, Metallica, Ride the Lightning. To this day, this is my favorite Metallica album. This came out in '84 on Elektra, of course. This is their second album. It has changed over the years. There was a brief period where I felt like And Justice for All is my favorite, but I always come back to this album. And over time, it's not going to change. This is, my definitive... Sorry about that. This is the definitive Metallica album for me. This is as good as it gets. It's the best thing they've ever done and will ever do, obviously. And not only that, I honestly think this is one of the best thrash albums ever made. I know there are a lot of Metallica haters who are automatically gonna disagree with that just because it's Metallica. But hey man, what can I say? It's just a classic album. I mean, for me, there's literally no filler on here. The songs are fairly long, but I never felt like it overstayed its welcome. When I put this on, it's front to back. Keeps my attention the whole time, no matter how many times I've heard it. I mean, that's what a good album should do. Next we have, this is a pretty big game changer for me. This was Slayer's Reign in Blood. Obviously, we've all heard it. We probably all own it. What made it such a game changer is I had never heard anything so fast and so violent and just so vicious and evil sounding in my life. I just didn't know that such a thing existed. Though it was, 2000 or so. In 2000, internet was still pretty much in its infancy. Most people still had dial-up, at least from what I remember. I mean, broadband might have been coming into play around that time. But anyways, when this came out, yeah, I had very little experience with the internet, so of course death metal had already came and almost went by the time I heard this, but to me, this was the most extreme thing I'd ever heard, and I never stopped listening to it. I have a hard time picking a favorite Slayer album. It's either Hell Awaits or this. I like them both for different reasons, but yeah, I will never stop listening to this. It's another one of those albums where it's famous for its running time, just under half an hour. And I always wished more bands would kind of adhere to that formula, because it's just so refreshing to listen to it front to back. It keeps your attention the whole time, and then it's over before you even have a chance to get bored of it. So yeah, Slayer's Reign in Blood, undeniable classic. And then there was this. I only had this live album for the longest time before I got any studio stuff from these guys, but I bought this and loved it from day one. And I'm a pretty big Overkill fan to this day, so we got Wrecking Your Neck live. This came out in 1995. It's a double tape. You can also get it on double CD. Recorded live at the Agora Theater in Cleveland. I'm assuming in 95, maybe 94, I don't know. But yeah, it's got a 22 their set list is 22 songs. At that time, I'd never heard anything like this. And Overkill are pretty unique anyways in the thrash realm. They've always been very, very punk influenced, and shown that in every album they've ever written. So the punk influence kind of made them different. Bobby Blitz's vocals, always liked him. Super charismatic, as charismatic as it gets. He still sounds great to this day, by the way. Then you had Dee Verni's, what would you even call that? Very prominent bass sound, which that was never really a drawing thing for me. But for me, it was mostly just Bobby's charisma and the punk influenced aggressive thrash songs. Yeah. I became a bigger fan after I started getting their studio albums, but this one, I just loved it right away. Now this next one, you might be going, that's not a thrash album. Which you'd be right, I guess it's not a thrash album, but it's an album that at the time made me want to listen to a lot more aggressive music, and at that time that would be thrash, because I didn't know death metal yet. So Painkiller, Judas Priest. I'd already been $4.95. I'd already been a huge fan of British Steel at this point, which is an album that I can't really listen to anymore. But loved it, loved the shit out of it. And when I heard this, I was like, holy fuck. I did not know Judas Priest went in a direction like that. To this day, one of my favorite albums, probably top 10 favorite metal albums. Like I said, this just made me want to continue that thrash route. I wanted to hear more faster and more aggressive music, because that's what Priest did on this one. They became faster and they became more aggressive, and I loved it. I know this is not always agreed with, but I think it's the best Priest album. Or maybe not the best, but it's my favorite. So you can't argue with that. On my path of, discovering faster and heavier music, I found Sepultura with Chaos AD. I actually wouldn't hear any of their other stuff for some years after this. But I loved it instantly, and I really still like this album. I think it holds up. I listened to it like a couple weeks ago. I think it's still awesome. This came out on Roadrunner Records. I mean, yeah, they were changing at this point. After this, though, they would just take a huge dive, and I would never really return to Sepultura. But this being kind of a changing point in their career, I still think that this album is okay. They're starting to bring in some of the tribal elements. There's maybe some hardcore influences thrown in here, but it all still works. It's still a heavy thrash album, bordering on death metal. Not as much death metal as maybe what they did previously, but still really awesome. I think it's great to this day. And yet another one where you might argue it being a pure thrash album, and that's fine. But at the time of finding this, I was really wanting to hear thrash metal, and this this definitely ticked all those boxes for thrash metal. Not only thrash metal, but what I loved as well, traditional metal, such as like Iron Maiden would be a big influence on this band. Shit. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Iced Earth. John Schaefer's songwriting has always been very, very kind of split down the middle between, at least in the early days, between thrash metal, particularly the Bay Area sound, particularly Metallica, I would say, some of his riffs, and Iron Maiden. And I think both of those bands, if I remember from interviews, he's name dropped both of those bands many times. But regardless, those are definitely the influences you get when you listen to this. And I love Iced Earth, mostly the early stuff, not so much the recent shit. But this is the album I discovered them on, and I still really love it. Came out on Century Media. And what year did this come out on, by the way? This came out in 98. So I discovered this just a couple years after it came out, and still love it. It's a great album. So shortly after that, I would discover, through this album, particularly like right here, this would be kind of like my introduction to crossover, which, minus this album and just a few others, I was never really a big fan of. Even until recently, I've been getting into like Suicidal Tendencies and DRI and stuff. I didn't like that stuff early on, or even 5 years ago. So, but this one always had a soft spot for it. Animosity by Corrosion of Conformity. This came out in 85? Holy shit. Yeah, 85 on Metal Blade. This is just a vicious album. I mean, for crossover, or for even thrash metal at the time, even already having been obsessed with Slayer at this point, I still felt like these guys were doing something that was even more even more directly angry and shit, man, even maybe more violent than Slayer. And so I didn't mind the punk influences and all that, the punk and hardcore influences, because, you know, that is what gave it the edge that it has. That's what made this album so brutal. It's not just a thrash album. It's got, you know, it's got the other influences to make it just a fucking Molotov cocktail, basically. Yeah, great album to this day. Still love it. Like I said, I've never been the hugest crossover fan, but I'm coming around to it. But that album would be a big part of, you know, why I said to myself years later, like, dude, you need to re-listen to some of this crossover stuff. And I've been doing that. Here's yet another album where, you know, maybe not a pure thrash album, but it always sounded thrash to me, and I really liked this album when it came out. I still listen to it occasionally, and when I do, I still enjoy it. We got War of Words by Fight. If anyone knows anything about Fight, this was Rob Halford's band after he left Judas Priest. This came out in, what year did this come out? Sorry. 93. So yeah, Halford left Priest and discovered Pantera. And this is fact. He discovered Pantera. He became a really big Pantera fan, and they were a big reason, big influence on him starting Fight. I'm not a Pantera fan, though I was early on. If I had a Pantera album to show in this video, I'd probably show it, because they were, you know, a big part of me, you know, delving into thrash metal. Though I don't like them anymore, I liked them a lot when I was 18, 19. So, but yeah, to this day, I'd rather listen to this than anything by Pantera. It's just a nice groove, thrashy groove, you know, metal album. Tons of great riffs, good energy, maybe some punk influences as well. They would only put out 2 albums. They would, after this, they would really shit the bed and put out a small Deadly Space. And this album was like kind of like a grunge album. It's pretty bad. Never liked it much. Speaking of pretty bad, that's pretty much the way you describe this album. Although I still try to throw it on every couple of years and just to listen to it. I don't know why, and I pretty much come up with the same conclusion every time. But this is the first album I heard by Exodus, Force of Habit. Man, look at that! Look at that cover. Jesus Christ! Fuck, man. Came out in '92. Goddamn. I guess this would be their Black album as well. Although to be honest, I don't know I'm not the biggest Exodus expert. I don't know what they did right before this, but this always sounded to me like their Black album. Basically, it's, you know, they're putting groove elements in there. They're slowing way down. They're toning the aggression down. It's still heavy. It's still aggressive, but it's more simplified, slower. Yeah, I don't know. There's some good stuff on here. It's not a good album overall, but I couldn't say that, you know, every single song in here is terrible. I wouldn't go that far, but liked it a lot at the time. Like I said, I still listen to it every couple of years to see how it's aged, and yeah, not that well. With this album, I'm kind of cheating because I don't have the album that I originally had. So we're going to talk about Testament. I'm just going to show the Legacy, but what I really had was a compilation, kind of, I guess you'd call it a compilation. It was called First Strike, Still Deadly, and it had re-recorded versions of songs from the Legacy and their second album, which I can never remember the name of, which, honestly, I always thought was pretty good. I mean, I know re-recording albums, that never goes over well, literally never. So I don't know, but I thought it was pretty good at the time, and even I thought I'd listened to it semi-recently, but I went looking for it and I couldn't find it. Needless to say, I loved the songs on there, especially the ones that were from this album. It was, you know, it was similar to Metallica, which is why it was so easy for me to get into, being a huge Metallica fan. But you could definitely tell they were taking inspiration from Metallica, especially later on, like on Practice What You Preach. But on this album, you know, they were kind of doing more of their own thing. They had some. You had what Metallica didn't have is they didn't have a guitar player like what's his name, Alex. Anyways, like I think his name is Alex something. Alex Skolnick. Alex Skolnick schools Kirk Hammett every step of the way. So I always thought that, you know, that neoclassical stuff that he was doing was really fucking cool. Yeah, Kirk Hammett was doing a little bit of that too, but I thought Skolnick did it way classier, and just for that reason alone, I thought this album kind of had a leg up on Metallica in a way. But classic album to this day. And, you know, I kind of want to retract my statement from recently when I said this was the only good album they did. I'd kind of forgotten about their second album. That album was really good, too, and maybe just almost as good as this. So, I need to pick it up. I don't have it, but I guess felt the need to say that. Next, this one, by the time I would pick this one up, I would be, I think it was 21 years old. I actually picked this up at a record store in Alabama. What's that town called? From Forrest Gump. Mobile, Alabama. Yes, Mobile, Alabama has a good record store, or at least they did when I was there. Voivod, Dimension Hatras. This came out, what, 88, I think? Pretty sure 88. Looks like this is a 99 repress. I always thought this was an original, but it's a noise pressing, but it's from 99, so maybe second pressing, I'm not really sure. Anyways, as you can imagine from what I have talked to, or what I've talked about listening to prior to this, as you can imagine, this was a game changer for me as well. Not in the way that I would seek out more stuff like this, but this would completely kind of, you know, throw before a loop. Definitely, I would still consider this a thrash album, but they were getting very progressive at this point. So if you want to call this a thrash album, it's like no other thrash album ever made. And the funny thing is, I've always liked this album. I kind of latched onto it immediately, but I had trouble getting into this band, anything they did before or after it, for quite a while. It was like, this is the only album I liked from them. That's changed. It's not like that anymore. I like almost all their stuff now, but it was hard for me to get into for the longest time. But this album has remained my favorite. So I think I'm still about 21 years old or so here when I found Creator's Pleasure to Kill. This came out also on Noise Records originally. This is a repress, but yeah, man. This has the Flag of Hate EP tacked onto it, which is cool. I liked this album immediately. It was my introduction to German thrash, which I hadn't heard before. Immediately when I put this on, I was like, dude, this is like the German Rain and Blood. And fast, crushing, barbaric thrash metal. Instantly loved it. And to this day, it's still my favorite Creator album. In my opinion, it blows away their debut. They've done good stuff since this album. They've done good stuff since this album, but I still think this is their best. But that's my opinion, of course. So I was starting to discover thrash metal that had a little bit of death metal thrown in there as well. And that was a new thing to me. And I did so by finding this album, Crowned Unholy by The Crown. This came out in like 2004. What's funny is this was actually a redone version of this album, which I wouldn't get for years later, Crowned in Terror. Originally, this was recorded with Thomas Lindberg on vocals, but once he left the band and they got their original singer back, they re-recorded it with their original guy. And I gotta say, I like this version better. I think his name is Magnus or whatever. His vocals just fit this band perfectly, like a glove, especially at this time. Very charismatic. And this album, man, it is just, there are just a million riffs packed into every song, not in a technical way, but just so fucking fast. Some of the fastest drumming I'd ever heard at this time. You know, and with that, there was also some melodic, you know, like Iron Maiden type riffs, because that's what the Swedish death metal guys were doing. Yeah, I mean, it just sounded like a thrash metal album on steroids, and love it to this day. And I guess barely, but furthering my journey into kind of crossover, I would find this Nuclear Assault album, and goddamn, this case is gross. There's sticky stuff all over it. This is Game Over with the Plague tacked onto it. Combat Records used to do that a lot. If they did a second pressing of a band, they would put, you know, if they had an EP, they would tack that on to a full album. So that's what they did with this. Glad to have it. John Connolly's vocals were kind of a big speed bump for me, but I grew to like them. And this was probably, for a long time, this is probably my favorite crossover album. It kind of sounded like Anthrax. If you took Anthrax's punk side and, you know, pumped it up, it's kind of what I thought this sounded like, and still love it to this day, despite, you know, not being that big of a crossover guy. But we all know Nuclear Assault. This band would also be a game changer. This album, this would take me into more of a technical thrash metal realm, and ever since I've heard this album, I've been wanting to hear more stuff like that. That would be a Corner with Mental Vortex. This is their album from '91. It's like their third or fourth album, but very good, man. Son of Lilith. Oh, great song. These guys were from Switzerland, and they played thrash metal with a very, I don't know if I'd really call it progressive, because that's not really the word, but with a lot of technicality and a lot of classy. They were just very classy musicians. Everything they did was very flashy. You know, they were way better musicians than 95% of any thrash metal bands at the time, and that's what really gave Corner something unique and awesome. I still need a couple of their albums that I don't have. I still love that one. And last but not least, this is actually, to this day, this is my favorite thrash metal album of all time, even though I would discover it a little bit later. Flotsam and Jetsam with Doomsday for the Deceiver. This is their debut album from, I think, '86. God damn, what an album. A lot of people will say that their second album is better, but I completely disagree. This album is just untouchable. It's got great songs. I mean, the songwriting here in this album is awesome. There's literally no filler. Eric A.K.'s vocals are so charismatic, and his range is so impressive that, I mean, he almost carries this band by himself, but not to take away from the musicians. I mean, the songwriting's great, and the musicianship is great. Kind of, a lot of the songs are kind of mid-paced, you know, chunky thrash with some faster stuff thrown in there from time to time, but it's something about them being so young, with, you know, just kind of youthful, reckless abandon, I think is what made this album so good. They would become better songwriters and better musicians even by the time their second album came out, but I felt like that maybe took away a little bit from the magic that they had on this one. So anyway, that's it, guys. That's my story. I know some of you guys have done similar videos to this, so, you know, I thought it'd be cool to do one on my own. By the way, I forgot to say what was playing on the stereo there was, this is a Finnish black metal band called Norns with their debut demo, In Fog They Appear. Really, really good, cold, raw Finnish black metal. Have these in my distro if you want to pick one up. Pretty cheap. I'll leave a link down at the bottom. Anyways, Louis says hi. He's growling over there because he wants to go do something. Thanks for stopping by. Cheers. Talk soon.